All right, let's look at housing. And earlier we had said that there are many stages to housing, from emergency housing back to finally getting into your permanent housing. So let's take a look. There's not too many pictures in this section, so don't get your hopes up to see a lot of pictures, but there's a lot of information here. In the Northridge earthquake, there were 7,000 yellow or red tag single-family units. That means that they couldn't have been lived in. So 27,000 multifamily units, 84% of those within the city were damaged. There was a recession that happened. There were multiple partners, cash flow problems, ghost towns, crime, and vandalism. All came out of the Northridge earthquake. And so today, when we look back and we see these things, which are not that long ago, we try to fix these things ahead of time and plan ahead. There were no SBA loans for homeowners. There was $321 million in HUD and home investment partnerships. Los Angeles put in $10 million to single and multifamily homes. There was mortgage forgiveness by the banks, which was huge. The city went to the banks and said, look, we need to have some type of program, and the banks gave mortgage forgiveness for people that didn't pay. And by 1997, 75% of all the homes that were damaged were repaired. It was definitely done locally. There's a lot of different organizations that help with housing, and there's organizations, this particular one, the National Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters. They come in and they look at the local government. They try to find temporary housing where they look for apartments that might be able to rent that are damaged. It is even possible to bring in trailers and park them on the lawns so people can live in them and work on their homes. In New Orleans, after Katrina, there were firefighters that homes were destroyed. And they actually put trailers, camping trailers, I guess, for lack of a better term, at fire stations. And the firefighters lived there with their families. And then when they weren't working at the fire station, they were working to repair their own homes. So there's temporary housing, there's different types of housing. We can get into repairs. Most times you look at your insurance company first, and you go whatever's left, or if you need additional funding, you go to SBA, the Small Business Administration, to get loans. If the loan is denied, then you can go to FEMA, and FEMA will actually provide some funding, and it's not very much money. FEMA's funding is set every year on October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, and currently it's just over $28,000 is currently the maximum award from individual assistance that you can get from FEMA, and they keep track of it very well. So earlier we saw in the module, we saw that they were giving out credit cards for $2,500 immediately after, when we looked at the IA section. Well, they keep track of that, and that comes off of that 28. And if they put a trailer on your house and you live in it, and the trailer's $11,000, that comes off the 28. So that's the maximum you're going to receive across the nation. So if you have a home in maybe Mississippi, Alabama, $28,000 may look like a really good deal, and you might be able to do a lot with it. But if your home is in Greenwich, Connecticut, or Fairfield, Connecticut, $28,000 isn't going to be very much. We move from temporary housing to repairing the housing you have, to replacing the housing, and then permanent housing, where we really want to have a brand new, we want to have you back in your house so that you develop, unfortunately it becomes a new norm, but you develop some type of norm. The Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, as a coordinator, DHS and FEMA coordinates the federal government disaster response and recovery efforts by building partnerships between state and local volunteer agencies and other federal agencies. When we looked at the historical, you see that the National Park Service is involved. We get the volunteer agencies. There are agencies that will come in and try to help individuals work on their homes. The Mennonites are great for rebuilding homes, as are some of the other religious groups. They'll come in, they rebuild the home, they don't ask anything, they don't look to teach you anything about their religion, they just come in and build the home for you. There's 4 models of housing recovery: complete redevelopment by government, infusion of outside aid targeted to low-income housing, and limited intervention where insurance will cover some of the losses, property prices will adjust, and government will help the poor, and then complete reliance on market forces. The phases of housing are basically an emergency shelter. I'm living in a gymnasium. I don't want to do that any more than I have to. Usually, I'd say 3 days is probably about the maximum because it has an impact. If I'm using a school gymnasium as a shelter, then the school's not open. So the sooner I get the people out and open up that gymnasium for school use, I can open up the school and get the community back into some semblance of normality. Temporary shelter could be a motel, hotel. I may be there for 30 days, 60 days, and then finally into some type of temporary housing. It could be an apartment building, it could be a trailer on my property. Temporary housing is an area where I could live for an extended period of time, but it's not my permanent housing. And then finally, I get back into my permanent housing, and this is, I've got my structure back, or my apartment is opened up again. Whatever I lived before, I'm able to go back into the same place I was prior to the disaster. Emergency shelter, short term. You don't want to be sleeping in a situation like that. You have no idea who's near you. You're fed meals 3 times a day, usually staffed by Red Cross or CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams. I will tell you this, in the recent disasters, they had issues staffing the shelters. So they turned to the people that were in the shelter, and they said, yeah, we'll help. And so now they're coming up with a plan that the shelter people, the individuals hit by the disaster, are able to manage themselves. Temporary shelter, maybe a week to a month. Hotel, motel, cruise ships. I don't think you'll see FEMA do a cruise ship again. They did try that, and the cruise ship was destroyed, and FEMA had to pay to totally rebuild it afterwards. Temporary shelters, usually in a fixed site, congressionally mandated to the Red Cross to provide it. Food, water, sanitation, first aid. When overrun, others may step in, faith-based, city, government, or civic organization. Temporary housing, usually 1 month to a year, trailers, rent-a-homes, and you'll notice the picture on the upper right. Those are all campers that people are living in, I believe that picture was in Mississippi. Temporary housing can establish a household routine. Kids to school, very important. Gives mom and dad a chance to try to get things in order, try to move forward. Laundry or cooking. It's transitional. You're not going to be there for a long period of time. It could move up to an average of 6 times before landing in permanent housing. You could be in one apartment for a while, move to another apartment for a while. Options, rental units, mobile homes, congregate care facilities, or permanent relocations or buyouts, where FEMA actually comes in and buys the home. And then permanent housing, move back into the home, new home, old site, new home, new site. There's a lot of different options that can be used, and here we see a church group that's in rebuilding homes for people. A lot of college students went down south after Katrina and tried to help them. Homeowner return process, when you think about it, it looks something like this. Sort, pile, remove debris, file for insurance, wait, inspections, denials, appeals, lawsuits. Clean the building site, slab, architectural blueprints, get a contractor if you can, who gets supplies, building permits, approvals. All this can take an extended amount of time. Plumbing, electrical framing, roofing, countertops, inspections for each. And many times in Florida, there's tremendous delays waiting for the inspectors to arrive. And then finally, it's time to move back into your home. It doesn't quite work as easy as this. There are a lot of delays and there are a lot of arguing and negotiating along the way, but in the end, the goal is to get everybody back home again. Some of the work that was done, we looked at the government administrative offices, did some studies on the Katrina shelters, and they said Red Cross and FEMA did not coordinate well. Frequent rotations of staff were problematic. They lost institutional knowledge of the people that were there. Red Cross problems were delivery of resources, no tracking. They looked at temporary housing. They said support the emergency support functions, not clear on roles of responsibility. Red Cross and feds lacked plans for catastrophic events. Temporary housing is not well linked to the full range of services. Resistance to relocations. People don't want to go someplace else. They want to stay where they are. They want to be back into the community. The kids want to go to school with the kids they went to school with before. The moms and dads want to stay connected with their social ties that they had before. So when they move people to new locations, which they did in Katrina, experience as a loss of social ties, disrupt social fabric of the community, tear apart important personal networks. Older residents may be more resistant because they're going to lose their friends and family. But buyouts will work. Here's an example. There was a community in Missouri along the Mississippi River that had flooding and repetitive flooding. In 1993, they had a flood. And there were 60 sandbag sites. Public assistance was 1,436,000 and 52 individual assistance application. FEMA came in and said, look, this is crazy. This town is going to continue to flood over and over again. We want to build you a new town someplace else. So in 1993, a large majority of the people said, yeah, we'll do that. We'll move. But some people said, no, I'm not leaving my community. I like it right here by the river. They stayed. 1995, it floods again. Look at the difference. 3 sandbag sites, $71,000 in a distance, in assistance, and 26 applications for individual assistance. Guess what happened to the people in 95? FEMA said, we built you this the new community up on the hill over there. It's only a mile away and it's up on the hill. Do you want to go? And the people in 1995 said, yeah, okay, we'll go. A few people stayed. 2002, 7 years later, it floods again. The whatever's left, only a couple people left in the lower area down by the river. And there were 0 sandbag sites, 0 public assistance, and one request for individual assistance application. So buyouts work. I mean, think about this. Where does this money come from? Where does that money come from? It comes from flood insurance, and you and I, if we own a home that's in a flooded area, have to buy flood insurance. We may never put a claim in for us, but this money is used to help those people that need flooded, that their homes are flooded. So when people move to a higher area, it helps everybody. When we move to the permanent housing phase, we're not going to have any more moves. We're finally back to where we are. Insurers are no longer willing to provide affordable coverage for full replacement value of every house. Government cannot take the role of full-service disaster recovery lender. The federal government is getting a little bit nervous about, with the National Flood Insurance Program, paying for all this. So we look at what we can do to make some changes. So they talk about the housing stock as 60 to 70% of the building stock of a community. It's the bedrock of a community. Socially and politically, we made a commitment to provide shelter for those made homeless, but economically, we're uncertain how we're going to pay for it. So here's how we try to do it. Fueled by a combination of federal disaster assistance, insurance settlements, and volunteerism. After insurance, the next largest amount of reconstructing funding for single-family housing came from the Small Business Administration. Poor homeowners did not qualify for SBA. They went directly to FEMA. So, conditions influencing the situation, composition of a housing stock, age and physical condition of housing market. What's the vacancy rates? If there's no vacancy rates, there's no place to provide temporary housing. Rebuild costs, debt ratio of the people that live there, social and economic status of the victims. Common problems, the head of the household issues. they may not be there. There's a lot of single family, single head of household in existence today, where a mom is trying to raise 2 or 3 kids living in a home. A big problem. Clear title to the land is an issue. Renters. It's amazing how many renters do not have renters insurance. It's relatively cheap, but renters do not typically buy renters insurance. And now they have no place to go, nowhere to turn, and they can't really get any aid to help themselves out. Income issues, especially for the elderly. They're living in their home. They may have a reverse mortgage. They're holding on by their fingertips to stay in their home for some reason. They think staying in their home is extremely important. They want that independence, and it becomes huge problems after a disaster. Lack of affording housing pre-event, no single clear system, and insufficient funds to cover a full return. A case management is looked at, a process through which a caseworker assists the survivors, often an ad hoc process put into place after. Has recently been professionalized. Katrina Aid Today website no longer is active, but it was active for a while in how they were helping the people from Katrina. Voluntary organizations are usually well organized. They're experienced organizations within a faith tradition. They tend to specialize in a very particular area of recovery and rebuilding. Some organizations feed. Some organizations like Procter & Gamble send in a tractor-trailer truck loaded with washing machines and dryers so you can wash your clothes and dry them. Some of them will help you work on rebuilding a home. Some will build you a brand new home. So a lot of the volunteer organizations are very, very active. They typically go after low-income populations, seniors, people with disability, underserved groups is who they go after. FEMA grants and loans, temporary housing, repairs to make the home safe, replacement costs not covered by insurance, permanent house construction, maximum loan of $200,000, and the maximum grant is $28,800. And I will tell you that when SBA comes in and gives a loan, they actually can go up to 100% of the value. They're a little bit better than a bank, and their interest on the loans are very, very reasonable. They're actually usually 1.5% to 2% less than anyone's current mortgage rate that you would have. So current mortgages, are probably around 3.7 to 4.25, 4.5. You can expect SBA today to come in with a loan for around 2.5%. Other FEMA assistance for homeowners, some room furnishing, appliances, educational materials, and windows, cabinets, sewage, and water systems, heating and cooling are all costs that they can pay for. So again, another short presentation, but to give you an overview of housing and where some of the different programs are and where we can get some aid. You'll see more in the readings and you'll see more in the text, but I wanted to present just a short presentation on some items that might be missed in some of the other documents.